Good morning, everybody. As we go to the Chitas of today, we're holding the portion of Yisrael, which is on in the book of Shemais, chapter 18, verse number 1. Vayishma Yisrael Koyim Midian Yisrael, the priest of Midian, heard Paisa Moshe, who is the father-in-law of Moshe, Skala Sharas Alekim, whatever God did li Yisrael to the Jewish people. Ulius, LaMoshe, Ulius, to Moshe and the Jewish people. To the Jewish nation, because God took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. Rashi says, what did he hear that he motivated him to come to the desert? He heard about the crossing of the sea and the war with Amalek. Yisrael, Rashi says he was called Yisrael, but he had 7 different names: Ruel, Jethro, Yisro, Chayvev, Paver, Kaini, and Putiel, and Yeser. So Rashi goes and says he was called Yited. In the section of Torah, you must discern Yisrael when it comes to a convert and observes, and the one who observes the commandments. Letter Vav was added to his name from Yeter to Yisrael. Chayvev. Why was it called Chayvev? Because he had a great love to the Torah, and that's why he was called and given that name. 1 second. Because he held the Torah dear Chibeb, and Chayvev Yisrael, for it says, how do we know that Chayvev is Yisrael? Because it says, for the descendants of Chayvev, the father-in-law of Moshe. But some of us say that Ruel was really the father of Yisrael, and which it says they came to Ruel, their father, is to understand the term that small children call their grandfather father. Chaysim Moshe, he was the father-in-law of Moshe. Why did the Torah have to tell us that? So Rashi says this expression indicates that Yisrael took pride in Moshe. He took pride that he had a son-in-law, Moshe, saying, I am the father-in-law of a king, so to say. Whereby previously Moshe described his greatness to his father-in-law. As it says, he returned to Yeser, his father-in-law. So you see that both of them honored and respected one another. The Moshe Yisrael. Rashi says Moshe and Israel, for Moshe was considered equal stature to Israel. As Kala Shadasa, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do? He did when he brought down the man ube'ed, and he gave the water, the well of water, or Amalek, and the destruction of Amalek. But the greatest wonder that he came for was that the Eibishter took him out of Mitzrayim. This was the wonder of all wonders, that he was taken out of Mitzrayim, that they were taken out of Mitzrayim. And Yisrael took, the father-in-law, Moshe took his wife, Moshe's wife, Tzipora, after he sent her away. So Rashi says, this is a new information. Doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that he sent her away. He said it says in the Torah he took her down there. So therefore, when the other one, blessed be he, said to Moshe, Midian, and go back to Egypt, Moshe took his wife and his sons, as the Torah tells us. And Aaron came out to meet him. And they met him in the mountain of God. They met at Har Chayrev, at Har Sinai. And Aaron came out to meet him, and they met. And Aaron asked him, "Who are these people? Who are this women and these children?" And Moshe Rabbeinu replied, "This is my wife, who I married in Midian, and these are my sons." And Aaron asked him, "And where are you bringing them? You're bringing them to Mitzrayim." And Moshe Rabbeinu, "They're coming with me. They're coming to Egypt." And Aaron said, "We have already so grievous over the first one. You're going to start bringing more people to Mitzrayim. This is the place you want to bring them." So Moshe Rabbeinu said to his wife, "You know what? Go back to your father's house." And she took her 2 sons and she went back to her father's house. And she brought her 2 sons with her. Gershom, one was called Gershom. Because Moshe Rabbeinu said, I have been a stranger in an alien land. And the other one was Eliezer. because the God of my father came to my aid. And he saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now she said, brings the Medrash, she says that when Dasan of Avinam informed on Moshe and Aaron regarding Egypt, and Moshe regarding the Egyptian that he killed, the Pharaoh sought to kill him. And his neck, the Medrash says, his neck became like a pillar of marble. So they broke their swords and he got away. And Yisrael and the father-in-law Moshe came to Moshe with his wife and his children to the desert, which he was then encamped. Haralakim, they were out the mountain of God. Ash says we already know they were in the desert, so why mention it again? The answer is the Torah wishes to tell you the greatness of Yisrael. That Yisrael enjoyment abundant worldly. Yisrael was a Kohen Midian. He was a leader in Midian. He was a wealthy person, a lot of property, a lot of flock. But he decided to move. He decided to come to a desert. And yet he inspired a bandit to go into the desert, to a desolate place. In the words, to hear the Torah, he said, wow, I got to come to the Yidden. I need to come to see what Yiddishkeit is and learn Torah. He said, they were told to Moshe, behold, your father-in-law is on his way. And he's coming with your wife and 2 children. Through a messenger. So the message was, if you will not go out to greet me for my sake, come out for your wife's sake. And if not for your wife's sake, come out for your children's sake. But here you see Moshe Rabbeinu says, Moshe Rabbeinu went out to honor his father-in-law. He prostrated him, he kissed him, and they inquired each other about their welfare. And they entered the tent. Now she says that Yisrael was accorded a great honor at that moment. But once Moshe Rabbeinu went out to greet him, the entire Aaron went out, the Aviyah went out, and there was a whole entourage who went out to greet this Yisrael, this man. And he prostrated and he kissed him. For these words alone, I do not know who prostrated himself to whom. It doesn't say exactly the Moshe Rabbeinu prostrated, Yisrael did it, but it's clear once the word ish l're'eyu, a man to his fellow. So once it says the word ish, elsewhere, who is called the ish in the Torah? Well, ish Moshe. So that's ish is going on Moshe Rabbeinu. That we know that Moshe Rabbeinu is the man, so to say. He's called in the Torah Ish Lakim, Ish Moshe, etc. Moshe Rabbeinu told his father-in-law, let's call Hashem Lapari, told his father-in-law whatever happened the last year, Lamatzrayim to Egypt, Israel, because of the Jewish people. That's Kol HaTalah, whatever happened, all the travails and all the situations. Hashem Matzasim Baderech, which found them in their journey, Hashem, and they're able to save them. Now she says, in order to draw his heart, to bring him closer to the way of Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to inspire his father-in-law to become Jew, become a Yid. And therefore he told him all the greatness that would happen. All the situation that happened at the Red Sea, Sea of Reeds, and the attack of Amalek. Atlah, now she says, the Lamed and the Aleph belong to the root of the word, but the Tuf is the auxiliary letter, an integral part of the noun that is sometimes absent. Nouns of similar form, like Tekuma, Tenufa, Teruma, Tenua. So you have that letter that accentuates the word. Yisrael rejoiced on all the good. Asheras Hashem Yisrael. Yisrael was very happy, was very joyful in this whole situation. Asher Tzilim Yamitzrayim, that ultimately that they were safe from the land of from the hands of Egyptians. Now she says, Yisrael rejoiced. This is the straightforward meaning. Yisrael rejoiced. He was happy. But the Midrash explains his flesh became full of goosebumps. He was distressed. Actually, a negative. The Midrash comes and tells us a negative a little bit. That you say, wow, there was such a destruction in Egypt and all the sadness of the Egyptians, so to say. This is an example of proverbs of people say regarding a descendant of a convert. Up to 10 generations, do not shame a non-Jew in his presence, because if you shame a non-Jew in their presence, even if he becomes a Jew, he might pack his bags and run away. So it's hard to get you can take a person out of Egypt. It's hard to get the Egypt out of him. But the beauty of the Rashi is he takes the first interpretation of what he holds the closest to the meaning of the verse. Question is, why does he bring down this medrash? As Kala Teva Samon, the favor of providing the man, Babeid and the well, Batera and the giving of the Torah. And but most of all, that he saved them from the hands of the Egyptians. For the land was so securely shut that no slave was able to escape from Egypt until now. So and now 600,000 people, men alone, left. This was amazing because this was an unusual situation, and therefore this was the thing that blew his mind away. And therefore Yisrael said, Yisrael was the first one to mention Baruch Hashem. He was the first one to mention, thank you, God. Baruch Hashem, what Jewish people say. Asher hitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim, who saved you from the hands of Egyptians. Miyad Pari, from the hand of Pharaoh. Asher hitzil asayom, who saved these people mitachas yad Mitzrayim, from the authority of the Egyptians. How we live with this pasuk today, every day. Take us out, take the Jews out of the hands of these evil Egyptians. Asher hitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim umakosha, it's a difficult people. Miyad Pari melech kosha, it's a hard king. This was evil people, evil leadership, all evil that a Jew should survive it. Mitachas yad Mitzrayim, from the hand of the uncle, is translated miravas, during subjugation and authority. Doesn't mean that they were totally subjugated to the Egyptians. God Hashem, now I know that God is great. We call Elokim for all the gods. For the scheme that they plotted against others happened to themselves. Midah keneged midah. He was so amazed how God does punishes measure for measure. Ati Adaiti. Sanash says, I already recognized God previously, but now I recognize even more. We call Elokim from all deities. From here, we teach us that Yisrael was a person who acquainted himself with all deities of that times. Yeah, he was the idol. He knew every idol worship in the world, and there was no deity that he didn't worship himself. Now she says the Egyptians plotted against the Jews. Happened exactly against them. They planned to destroy them by water, and they were destroyed by water. So he realized midah keneged midah, how God does measure for measure. Asher zodu, what means that they acted wickedly, but our rabbis expound this phrase, an expression similar to Vayazed Yaakov Nozid, and Yaakov cooked a stew, meaning the pot in which they cooked, they were themselves cooked. That's the question. That's the expression. Yazid, they were the same. They cooked a pot to destroy the Jewish people, and in that pot they destroyed themselves. Yisrael offered up sacrifices to God. And Aaron and all the elders of the Jewish people came lechem to sit down and eat bread with the father of Moshe before God. Now she says, Oila. This is the first time we find the word Oila in the Torah, Hashem. In the next book, the book of Vayikra, you're going to hear this word many times. Oila means literally that's completely ascends. Oila means to go up. There's certain sacrifices that go up entirely. Zvachim, what means zvachim? It's also an expression of a sacrifice. Shlomim. These are called, later we'll learn, peace offerings. Vayave Aaron, and Aaron came. Rashi says, Moshe, where was Moshe? Where was Moshe Rabbeinu? He was the one who greeted him. So where was Moshe Rabbeinu? The answer is he was standing and serving him. Moshe Rabbeinu became the server. He became the one who was serving him, serving everybody. So happy and showing to show honor his father-in-law that he was the server for the day. They were standing, sitting before God. What does that mean? From here we learn that one who partakes in a meal where scholars are present, as if in the joys, the radiance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when you sit down to a meal and you eat, you say Divrei Torah, that's where scholars are present. When you say a Dvar Torah at your meal, then the Eibishter God is present also at your meal. And that completes the Chumash for today. We now go to the 23rd chapter of Tanya. As we continue to journey through the teachings of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe says, the previous chapter, the Alter Rebbe explained that from God's perspective, nothing is ever separate from him. And that's a very important thing, very important concept. The yichud, the unity that Rambam writes, there's no true unity in the world but the unity of God. Because once God created time and space, everything, as the Mishnah says, Ein lo davar she'ein lo makom, everything has its own space. And even a human being has his own space. But the Eibishter is no such thing. And by God, everything is him. And he is everything. So nothing is ever separate from him, from the divine word of God, which creates everything, is unlike the word spoken by a human being. The latter comes to separate from the speaker, while the former remains always within its source, which is God. It is only from the subject's viewpoint, for the created beings that are considered as separate. So we look at God's word as a separate word. But we have to realize that when we read God's word, we are in essence reading God. When we learn the Torah, we are in essence grabbing God, in clothing God, in taking God. That's why we consider Torah as lechem, mayim. We give these analogies to Torah as lechem. That's like you digest lechem. You intake mayim. The Torah was there to be taken. The Eibishter gave noisen at Torah. He gave it to be taken. The truth is, that's why the Mishnah says, the Alter Rebbe started in the Tanya, the first chapter, that says, Bittul Torah, the Eibishter gave a gift to be taken, and we're not taking it. We're deciding to take something else, which is a buzz, it's an embarrassment to the whole situation, embarrassment to God. They're able to regard themselves as such because they receive the divine life, which animates them by the way of many tzimtzumim, so we feel separate. And through the concealment of the divine continence of God, the concealment of the inner and ultimate aspect of God's will, and therefore we feel ourselves. The logic corollary of this idea is that anything in which divine will stands revealed is completely nullified before God and absolutely one with him. In this chapter, the Alter Rebbe applies this idea to Torah and mitzvahs, in which God's will is manifest. He demonstrates how one can unite with God's will and wisdom, and thereby with God himself, through the study of Torah and through the observance of mitzvahs. Okay, so first of all, the Alter Rebbe is not here coming to prove the greatness of Torah, that the Jews' belief in Torah. You have to come to the Tanya, and you have to have a munah in the Torah, that the Torah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That number one, the Torah is from God. Not a rabbi's made-up thing. The Torah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you understand what that means, then you understand that what it means. It means that that's the chachma of the Eibishter. It's the wisdom of God. It's not only the wisdom of God, it is the ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's his will. It's his desire. It's his delight. We have to ultimately comprehend this, to understand that we will have a whole different respect, a covet to the Torah, a whole different respect, and a whole different awareness that will create within ourselves to what this Torah is, and why we're learning it, and what this mitzvah is. What is this mitzvah? that we should do and why we should do it. Not because we were commanded, we were forced. We should have a whole different appreciation to it. So in the light of all what was said above, if you learned the previous chapters extremely well, the last 3 chapters of Tanya, 20 and 21 and 22, you can better understand well and more fully, more fully and clearly, at least stated, you'll understand what the Zohar says. Something that has been expressed by all Rabbeim, this line, that the Torah and God is one. And then the commentaries of the Zohar, Pirush, they gave the explanation. They gave it a more of analogy. The 248 commandments, positive commandments of God, is the 248 limbs of God. Ramach Evarim de Malka. Very interesting expression. There's 248 limbs in a human being, and there's 248 mitzvahs, and they correspond to the 248, so to say, limbs in God. Just what is the meaning of the Zohar? Just as every organ of a human body is the reciprocity, the connection for the particular faculty of the soul that is vested in that organ. Meaning the eye is the receptacle for the faculty of sight, and the ear is the faculty of hearing. So too is every commandment a channel and a way and a conduit for the divine will that is vested and expressed in that particular commandment. We should realize a commandment is not only just a command. A command is a connection. It's simply a conduit of God's wisdom and will to come down to me. The commandments in general represents God's will, and each individual mitzvah is an expression of a particular aspect of that will. So we will, Baruch Hashem, that we should be healthy. It's a blessing we give when somebody is sick. He should be healthy. He should be healthy in all 248 limbs of his body. Because a person understands what a kumash shlema means. A person understands what means a complete body. The chas v'shalom, not one limb should be missing. Not one limb of his body should be not working. Chas v'shalom. He should have a healthy body, and from the top of his head to the tiptoes of his toes, everything should be healthy, and everything should be there. So too, why wouldn't I want to have a will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in my existence? I want to be handicapped spiritually. Why would I want to be handicapped, Chas v'shalom? I want every limb of this body. I want every mitzvah that God has given me. And that's why we beg for Mashiach, because there are today many, many mitzvahs of this body that we cannot do. We simply can't do it. Mashiach's not here. Beis Hamikdash is not here. We can't bring karbanos, etc., etc. It should be noted of that according to this analogy, the mitzvahs are no more than God's organs. An organ of the body is not one with the soul. True, when any particular soul power is vested in its corresponding organ, they function together as one, but they remain two separate entities that have been joined together. By the same token, the mitzvahs are not actually one with God. They are merely, as it were, joined to Him. Yet the Torah, whose whole purpose is to explain the mitzvah, is entirely one with God. As quoted early in the Zohar, that's why Talmud Torah can negate kulam. And that's why there's no greater unity with us and God than learning Torah. because God and the Torah is one. And now we become one with that Torah. So we become one with God. We don't become one only with God's will and his desire. We become one with God himself. So what then is the meaning of this greater unity, which is found in the Torah and acts of the Torah study that surpass even the unity of mitzvah that is fulfilled? This Alter Rebbe continues. The mitzvah constitutes the innermost will and its true desire, which is clothed in all the upper and lower worlds, to give them life. So all the worlds are a product of God's will. He desired that they exist, and his desire is they brought them into being. However, this desire is but an external manifestation of his underlying internal will, the desire for mitzvahs. Why, in fact, does God desire that the world exists? Because his desire that the mitzvahs be performed. And this is possible only when there's somebody to perform them. And when there are objects with which they perform them, to this end, God created the world. This can be illustrated analogy of man who travels abroad on business. Naturally, he travels because he wishes to do so. But his internal, ultimate desire in the journey, his underlying motive, lies in the profit he expects to reap. When we probe still deeper, we find that the desire for the profit itself is an external expression of even more internal desire, for the desire for the things which he's able to buy with the proceeds of his business. And we can go even more deeper. Why does he want the proceeds of his business? What is his true desire? Self-understood, his true desire is that with this proceeds, he can have a house, and he can have food, and he can have clothing. So we can go, and why do you want that? Ultimately, when it comes to the essence of his soul, of why he wants all these outer trappings. So here lies a true object of his pleasure. It is desire which he creates, and the desire for profit, which leads in turn to the desire to travel. So too in the case of the worlds of mitzvahs. God's external will, his desire that the world exists, is motivated by his desire for true object of his pleasure, which is mitzvahs. Thus the mitzvahs represents the innermost will. For it's a sake that God gives life to the world is the innermost will of Gashmias, of this whole world, is a mitzvah, which is also done begashmias, in a physical way. Kikol chayusam, because we realize that the very life and the sustenance of this world, talui b'maisa mitzvahs, is all dependent on the action of mitzvahs. Shall tachtenim, that creatures, that human beings do, keneda, as it's known. And so shamaitza mitzvah, so comes out, so it comes out. Shamaitza mitzvah kiyum, that the performance and the fulfillment of a mitzvah, ulevushia pnimi, is the innermost garment, lepnimi ratzon elyon, for the innermost aspect of God's will, why he created this world. Shemaitza zeh, because due to this performance of this mitzvah, brings about the God's will and God's desire to come into the world and to clothe them. So since God desired the world only as a vehicle performance of mitzvahs, as explained above, it's only for this reason that he maintains the whole world, all the worlds, this physical world and also its spiritual dimension. And that's why they're called the limbs of the body, the limbs of a king. That's the analogy. Just like the organs of the body are but a garment for which the soul are complete, and therefore are completely, utterly surrendered to the soul, because they're just the garment in which the soul clothes itself in. If there's no soul, what is worth the whole body? Garnished. So therefore, The soul needs the body because the soul needs to come into every part of the body. That's what people would say. A small hole in the body is a big hole in the soul, because the soul needs that organ. It needs that aver. If it doesn't have that aver, chas v'shalom, it cannot do the mitzvah. Because therefore we see when a person has the desire to move his hand or to move his foot, Baruch Hashem, they listen to his will. Take it from miyad. They listen to his will right away. He doesn't have to say to the body. When the soul wants something, when a person wants something, he does it. It doesn't have to take even a second. The very instant that it went up in his mind, in his will, he moves. So the response of his organs are automatic. No one needs to consciously occupy himself with activating his hand. As the phrase says, without any command or instruction, they move. Baruch Hashem. Well, one must exert effort, activating his faculties. When one dislikes a particular task, but forces himself to do it on the strength of logic, this effort is spoken as an internal command from one's faculty to another. However, when one's will activates the organ of his body, there's no command. And that's why the Eibishter wants, God wants a mitzvah shouldn't be a command. It should be an automatic thing. It should be a reflective thing. A person should run to a mitzvah. That's what the Mishnah says, Ratz la mitzvah. Run to a mitzvah. Ratz comes from the Ratzain. Have a desire for a mitzvah, because there's nothing greater than this mitzvah. It should be your Ratzain. Shouldn't be something that you are forced and you have to talk yourself into it. You should do it with Ratzain, because that's what it really is. You should do it with goodwill, because it is the will of God. There's no better way to do a mitzvah but with will. The Eibishter didn't want that a Jew should do a mitzvah with great seichel, with great intellect. That was not the point of the mitzvah. That's the point of the Torah. The Eibishter, God wanted you to do the mitzvah right away. Mitzvah b'oliyotcha al tachmitzena. A mitzvah comes to your hand, do it ASAP. Learn from Avram Avinu. God asked him to do a mitzvah, he ran. He said, Hineni. He didn't say, let's first have a conversation. What it is, how it is, when it is. No, I'll do it. That's what the Jewish people did in this week's Parashah Mitzvah. Na'aseh v'nishma. When it comes to a mitzvah, na'aseh v'nishma. When it comes to Torah, we're going to sit and learn. That's going to take time. That's going to take, when we're going to get involved with our brains, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. Intellect takes time. But action takes a second. Action takes a moment. Just do it. You don't sit down and contemplate, should I move my hand? Shouldn't I want to move my hand, my hand moves. That's Ratzei. In essence, the Alter Rebbe explaining to you the difference Torah and mitzvahs is. Torah is Chachma. Mitzvahs is Ratzei. It's will. It's the will of God. It should be our will. Asay ritzeincha k'ritzeinai, the Mishnah says. Do your will like the will. Do God's will like you do your will. Just like you do your will. Automatically. You don't have to have a meeting to do your will. So to do God's will. Know what a mitzvah is. It's the will of God. So you should be your will. It should be something that you desire, something you run to, something you're happy about. So too, just as the organs of the human body completely united with one soul, and they surrendered to it, surrendered to a mitzvah, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we'll listen. So too, the life force, the animated performance and fulfillment of the commandments completely surrender to the divine will. We should realize when we do a mitzvah, we are connected to the divine will, the Ratzon of the Eibishter. We are fulfilling God's will. Who wouldn't want to fulfill God's will? If any great person would come to you and ask you to do him a favor, you'd run. We would run. Who wouldn't want to do a will for a great person? The Eibishter. Who wouldn't want to do a will of God, which is clothed therein? And this life force becomes in relation to the divine will, like a body to a soul. It comes like a body to a soul. When I do the divine will of God, it's like I've taken a vessel and I put in God into it, like the body to the soul. And so to the external garments of the divine soul of the person fulfilling the particular commandment, which is the faculty of action. which is external compared to the faculty of speech and thought, since its function outside of oneself. You should realize that even though it's an outer expression, it's a physical expression. Every mitzvah I do is a physical expression. But it clothes itself, this physical expression, clothes itself with the vitality of the performance of the mitzvah, and thus it too becomes like a body to the soul in relation to the divine will, is completely surrendered to the divine will. That's it. When I do a mitzvah and I run to do the mitzvah and I enjoy the mitzvah, my mitzvah becomes surrendered and my body becomes surrendered at that time because I'm doing the mitzvah to the will of HaKadosh Baruch, to the will of God, to the tainig. And God, if you understand what will is, as the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, will is connected to tainig. There's no greater tainig when a person's will is accomplished. There's no greater delight when a person's will is accomplished, when he does what he wants and he accomplishes what he wants. When we do the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're accomplishing his will. It's connected to that thing, and automatically we create a tainig in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why the tainig, when building the Mishkan and bringing korban, nachas ruach, reach nechayach. It's a pleasing smell. I'm pashid having such hana. I'm having such pleasure. Therefore, even the organs of the body, when I give tzedakah with my hand, put on tefillin, which is performing this mitzvah. At that moment, I'm doing the mitzvah. Not am I doing a mitzvah, some spiritual thing. I'm pashid doing a mitzvah with my physical body. So now my physical body has become a vessel to that mitzvah. The time of that doing the mitzvah. They become a chariot, a vehicle for godliness. That's an alien to the will of God. For example, the hand that gives charity, or does other mitzvahs, whatever he does. He walks to shul, he runs to a mitzvah, he eats kosher, he puts on tefillin, whatever it might be. A guy in mitzvah, so to the feet that walk to a mitzvah. The chein so to the tongue. And the tongue that speaks words of Torah. And then the mind that it thinks words of Torah. The fear of God, which in the greatness of God, blessed be He. So when these organs occupy with a mitzvah, they're totally surrendered like a chariot to the divine will enclosed in that mitzvah. Note, the physical organs become not merely a chariot for the divine will. It doesn't become surrendered to it and unified with divine will to the same extent as the divine soul faculty of action, whose unity, as the Alter Rebbe is compared to the unity of body and soul. The unity of body and soul surpasses that of the chariot and its rider. Body and soul, although originally it's two separate entities, one physical and the other spiritual, become one entity when united. No part of the body is devoid of the soul. Conversely, the soul has completely adapted itself to the body. And it becomes transformed into a corporal life force. Divine soul faculty of action, being God's power, can achieve this level of unity with God when it employs the performance of mitzvahs. The organs of the body, on the other hand, although they've been involved in a mitzvah, can reach no higher than the level illustrated in the analogy of a chariot. Because a chariot is a daimim, is an inanimate thing. A chariot has no will of its own, is indeed completely subservient to the rider. Yet it's not ununited with him, but it's completely something else than the person. So even because the chariot is an inanimate thing, while the rider is not an inanimate thing, he's a living creature, he's a human being. So to be able to so unity is not by the chariot, so it's by the human being. It's a much greater unity than by the chariot, who is basically an inanimate thing that's doing the will of its driver. And therefore the sages said, that the Avos were truly a chariot of God. Shekol Eivadehem, all their organs, Kulam Hayu Kedoshim, they were all holy. They were separate and detached from all mundane matters. And they became their chariot. They became a vehicle for nothing but the divine will. The reason the sages designated specifically that the patriarchs were a chariot, although every Jew's body becomes a chariot when performing mitzvahs, is that the patriarchs' submission to the divine, to God, was unique in its power, its scope, and its consistency. All their organs were totally surrendered to divine will throughout their life. They didn't. That's why it says expression. Avram ba bayomim. Avram came with his days. Every day was unique. Every day was totally given over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was not a day, there was not a moment that wasn't totally given over to God. Whereas other Jews, only their organs which perform a mitzvah is like a chariot, but not the whole body. And only during the act, in fact, the same organ which today serves as a chariot of God's will might conceivably serve the opposite purpose tomorrow. So that's why we call the Zohar calls the patriarchs with chariots, because they specifically gave over their lives 24/7, 365 days a year, and the whole entire life. The patriarchs and the matriarchs were total like chariots. It was totally bottled. That's why God calls Avram Avdi, Abraham my servant, because he was an Eved like Kadosh Baruch Hu. He was totally a servant to God. I'm going to continue in this concept with Alter Rebbe. Is going to open our eyes to the power of a mitzvah, to the power ultimately of Torah, and the uniqueness in each one, and the purpose that God gave these two entities, Torah, which is the wisdom of God, and mitzvahs, which is the Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the will of God, and how we're going to incorporate those two entities within our life and within the way we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu every single day. But that ends the Tanya of today. Today is the 11th day of the month, which the Tillim is chapter 60 to chapter 65. If you do those 6 chapters, you do the chitas of the day. The Rebbe writes in the Yom Yom today, in the 11th day of Shvat, the routine of the day begins with saying Moedani, which means I acknowledge before you, living and eternal King. This is said before the morning, in the morning, even washing of the hands, even while the hands are still impure. The reason is, why do we say this even before we wash our hands? And the reason is that all impurities of the world do not defile a Jew's I acknowledge. Maida, a Jew's maida, a Jew's acknowledgement is higher than impurity and impurity. He might lack in one thing or another, but his maida ani always remains intact. And this is not only important to him when he does it in the morning, self-understood, it's important to him his whole day. And he should never forget that even though he might have a good day, a bad day, he might do right things, he might do sometimes wrong things, the maida ani always stays intact. The acknowledgement that a Jew has that the Eibishter is his essence and God is his source never, ever leaves any single Jew. Have a wonderful and beautiful day. I invite you all, 10 o'clock. We'll continue to learn Tanya together, either at the JEI, at the school over here, right next to the Chabad house, or you can come on Zoom or on Torah Direct, whatever you want to come and learn. Have a wonderful and beautiful day, and God bless you all. And we'll see you in Mitcham tomorrow.
Rabbi Bucket?
At 8 o'clock.